Once a retail giant, A&P's red and white logo dotted every town. But what really brought down America's first supermarket chain? From revolutionary beginnings to its dramatic collapse, join us as we uncover the true story behind what really happened to A&P. The story of A&P, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, is a compelling narrative of American capitalism, tracing its journey from a humble tea merchant to the undisputed titan of the grocery industry, only to eventually succumb to the relentless forces of competition, evolving consumer habits, and internal missteps. The early days, from tea to empire. A&P's roots stretch back to 1859, when George Gilman and George Huntington Hartford founded the Great American Tea Company in New York City. Initially, it operated as a mail-order tea and coffee business, catering to a growing nation. The firm quickly expanded, opening its first retail stores in the 1860s and rebranding as the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company in 1870. The name itself hinted at the grand ambitions of its founders. The early success of A&P was built on a simple yet revolutionary principle: low prices. They achieved this by buying directly from suppliers, eliminating middlemen, and passing the savings on to customers. This direct-to-consumer model was a novelty at the time and proved incredibly effective. By the turn of the 20th century, A&P boasted nearly 200 stores. However, it was under the leadership of George Huntington Hartford's sons, John and George, that A&P truly exploded. John Hartford, in particular, was a visionary. In 1912, he introduced the economy store format: small, no-frills shops with standardized layouts, cash-and-carry policies, and often located on less expensive secondary streets. These stores were designed for maximum efficiency and minimum overhead, allowing A&P to offer prices that competitors simply couldn't match. This innovation was so successful that by 1920, A&P had over 4,500 stores, and by 1930, an astonishing 15,000 across the East Coast and Midwest. It was at this point that A&P cemented its position as the largest grocery chain in the United States, a title it would hold for decades. The golden age and the dawn of the supermarket. The 1930s, despite the Great Depression, saw A&P continue to adapt. While the economy stores thrived on price consciousness, the emergence of the supermarket concept, larger stores offering a wider array of products, including fresh produce and meat with self-service aisles, presented a new challenge. Initially cautious, A&P eventually embraced the trend, opening its first supermarket in 1936. By 1939, it had already converted thousands of its smaller stores, demonstrating a remarkable ability to pivot and capitalize on changing consumer demands. This transformation allowed A&P to increase sales significantly, even as its total number of stores decreased. For much of the mid-20th century, A&P was an economic powerhouse. Its vertical integration was a key differentiator. A&P not only sold groceries but also manufactured many of its own private label products under brands like Ann Page and 8 O'Clock Coffee. They even owned fishing fleets, demonstrating a commitment to controlling the entire supply chain and further driving down costs. By 1969, A&P was still the largest food chain in the U.S., with sales more than double its nearest competitor, Safeway. However, the seeds of its decline were already being sown, the beginning of the end. The post-Hartford era, following the deaths of John and George Hartford in the 1950s, marked a turning point. Without their visionary leadership and willingness to take risks, A&P became increasingly conservative and resistant to change. Several critical factors contributed to its protracted decline: capital starvation and outdated stores. Despite being publicly traded, control of A&P largely rested with Ralph Berger, who headed both the corporation and the Hartford Foundation. Much of A&P's profit was siphoned off as dividends to satisfy the trust's income needs, and the company remained stubbornly opposed to debt financing. While competitors invested heavily in larger, more attractive, and technologically advanced supermarkets in the growing suburbs, A&P was slow to update its retail plan. By the 1970s, many A&P stores were considerably smaller, older, and less appealing than those of its rivals. Overemphasis on private labels. While private labels had been a strength, A&P continued to heavily promote them even as national brands, bolstered by increased television advertising gained immense popularity. A&P stores often had shelves dominated by its own brands, leading to a perception that national brands were frequently out of stock, frustrating customers who increasingly sought familiar products. High labor costs. As A&P's growth stalled, a rising percentage of its workforce consisted of long-tenured employees receiving higher wages, while competitors were rapidly expanding and thus had a larger proportion of newer, lower-paid workers. Failure to innovate and adapt. A&P became complacent, sticking to its basic, low-price strategy when consumer preferences were diversifying. Other chains began offering a wider selection of specialty products, emphasizing convenience and creating more inviting shopping environments. Increased competition. The grocery landscape became increasingly competitive. Regional chains grew stronger, and by the 1980s and 1990s, discount retailers like Walmart and Target entered the grocery market, often employing the very low-cost, high-volume tactics. The final chapters: bankruptcies and liquidation. In 1979, the German supermarket giant Tengelmann Group acquired a controlling stake in A&P, injecting much-needed capital and attempting a turnaround. Throughout the 1980s, A&P embarked on a series of acquisitions, including Kohl's Food Stores, Shopwell, Waldbaum's, and Farmer Jack, in an attempt to regain market share. Many of these acquired chains continued to operate under their own names, diluting the A&P brand identity. Despite these efforts, the company continued to struggle. The economic downturn of the late 2000s and a particularly ill-timed acquisition of the Pathmark chain in 2007 exacerbated its financial woes. A&P filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in 2010, attempting to reorganize and shed burdensome debt. While it emerged as a private company in 2012, the reprieve was short-lived. In July 2015, the company filed for its second and final bankruptcy, explicitly stating its intention to liquidate all assets. Its remaining stores were either sold off to competitors like Albertsons, ACME, Ahold Stop & Shop, and Key Foods, or simply shuttered. On November 25, 2016, the last remaining A&P locations closed their doors, marking the end of a 156-year retailing tradition. The story of A&P serves as a stark reminder of the perils of complacency and the critical importance of continuous adaptation in a dynamic market. Its downfall can be attributed to a confluence of factors: a resistance to modernization and suburban expansion, underinvestment in its physical plant, and over-reliance on private labels in a market shifting towards national brands, rising labor costs, and a fundamental inability to respond to changing consumer preferences and intensifying competition. A&P, once a pioneer, ultimately became a casualty of its own past successes, failing to innovate and evolve with the times. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for the latest updates about the vintage videos.